Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. The evening had settled into the familiar rhythm of post-dinner quiet. Elias and Clara had just cleared the last of the plates, the mundane discussions about leaky faucets and grocery lists beginning to soften into the comfortable murmur of shared space. Then it happened. Elias, reaching for a stray napkin, casually asked Clara about an overdue electricity bill, a question born of habit of the years he'd automatically shouldered such things. Clara's reaction, however, was anything but habitual. Her gaze, which had been soft moments before, sharpened. A sigh escaped her lips, laced with a weariness that went beyond the day's demands. "Elias," she said, her voice low but carrying a surprising weight, "I am not a possession you own." The words hung in the air, a sudden frost in their warm kitchen. Elias felt a jolt, a disquiet he couldn't immediately name. Was it an accusation? A quiet rebellion? A declaration of a boundary he hadn't even realized he was crossing? The way she looked at him, the slight tremor in her voice, felt like she was drawing an invisible line, challenging the very bedrock of their shared life. He simply nodded, a tight knot forming in his chest. What could he possibly say? It wasn't anger that bloomed first. It was something colder, a slow hardening. As he silently wiped down the counters, Clara's words echoed in his mind. He thought of the countless late nights at the office, the unexpected crises he'd navigated, the quiet assurance he'd always provided, making sure her world ran smoothly. And now this, had it all been perceived as ownership? That night, sleep evaded him. He replayed the scene, each inflection of her voice magnified in the darkness. Had he been controlling? Had his care, his constant taking charge, inadvertently diminished her role, made her feel like a passive recipient? Or was this a deflection, a subtle sidestep of the responsibilities they had both embraced when they said, "I do"? He couldn't decipher her true intent, but a stark realization settled within him. Their understanding of accountability in their marriage was fundamentally different. Staring at the ceiling, a quiet resolve began to solidify. Fine, he thought, a touch of bitterness lacing the resolve. If she doesn't want to be my property, I won't treat her as such. But that also meant the unspoken contract, the one where he automatically absorbed the lion's share of responsibility, was void. This wasn't about retribution. It was about a recalibration, a striving for equilibrium. Independence she wants, she'll have it, unfettered. The next morning, Clara moved through her routine as if nothing had fractured the previous evening. But Elias was already operating on a different plane. The internal shift was absolute. He decided on a quiet revolution, a subtle recalibration rather than a dramatic upheaval. No grand pronouncements, no accusatory confrontations. Instead, he would let their new reality unfold organically. When Clara casually mentioned a bill needing payment that week, Elias replied, his tone even, "That's something you can handle." A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but she didn't press it. A small thing, perhaps, but for Elias it was symbolic. He was no longer the default caretaker. He wouldn't manage her life while his efforts were perceived as oppressive or insignificant. Throughout the day, opportunities arose to gently cede responsibility. The persistent drip of the kitchen faucet, usually his immediate fix, he now ignored. When her car's fuel gauge hovered near empty, he didn't automatically reach for his keys. Each instance brought a puzzled frown to Clara's brow, a hint of annoyance, but no direct challenge. Not yet. Her declaration from the night before still resonated within him, fueling his quiet determination. This wasn't about punishing Clara. It was about reestablishing a balance that felt equitable. If she rejected the notion of belonging to him in that way, then she couldn't simultaneously expect the privileges of that dynamic. He wouldn't interfere, but neither would he automatically prop things up. By the day's end, a palpable tension hung in the air between them. Clara sensed a shift, a subtle alteration in their usual rhythm, but the dots hadn't connected yet, and Elias wasn't about to draw the lines for her. If she craved independence, she would have to navigate its entirety. That evening, lying in bed, A strange clarity settled over Elias. This wasn't a game, a temporary power play. This was a fundamental shift in his perception of their partnership, a new framework for their future. Whatever lay ahead, he was prepared to let Clara experience the full spectrum of life without his implicit ownership. The next morning, Elias woke at his usual early hour, but the familiar tug of obligation didn't pull him from the sheets. He lingered, listening to the sounds of Clara's morning routine drifting from down the hall. Normally, he'd be the one brewing coffee, a small act of service he'd always performed. Today, he remained still. Let her, he thought. When he finally emerged, Clara was in the kitchen, a mug clutched in her hand, standing by the silent coffee maker. Her car keys lay beside her, and Elias could see the unspoken expectation in her eyes, the reminder about her overdue oil change, a topic she'd raised repeatedly that week. But he said nothing. He poured himself a cup of the lukewarm leftover coffee and sat at the table, scrolling through his phone as if it were any other day. "You're going to take the car in today, right?" Clara asked after a strained silence. Elias didn't look up. "No, that's something you can handle." Clara froze, her mug halfway to her lips. "What do you mean? You always take care of that." He shrugged, a small, deliberate movement. "It's your car." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but she didn't argue. She offered a clipped, "Bye," and the faint slam of the car door echoed through the quiet house. That was the first hairline crack in their routine, but it was just the beginning. Throughout the day, Elias moved with a deliberate detachment. Clara called during her lunch break, a familiar request in her voice. "Hey, don't forget the car insurance is due tomorrow." He'd always handled it seamlessly. "You can pay it," he replied, his tone calm and unwavering. "The account details are in the folder." A pause stretched across the line, thick with unspoken confusion. "Why are you acting like this, Elias?" she finally asked, a hint of vulnerability creeping into her voice. "I'm not acting like anything, Clara," he said gently but firmly. "I'm simply allowing you to manage things you are perfectly capable of managing." Another silence, then a short, disbelieving laugh. "Okay, fine, whatever." When Clara returned home that evening, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Elias had deliberately left a couple of his usual tasks undone. The overflowing trash can in the kitchen was a silent testament. He saw her glance at it, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. She said nothing. Dinner was a solitary affair for Elias. He cooked for himself, left his dishes in the sink, and retreated to his study without offering to help with anything. It wasn't out of spite, but a quiet demonstration of the life she had seemingly requested, one where she wasn't his property, and by extension, he wasn't her default provider. That night, the dam finally broke. "Are you going to tell me what in God's name is going on?" Clara asked, her voice sharp with frustration. Elias leaned back in his chair, meeting her gaze steadily. "You said you're not my property, right?" Her expression hardened. "Yes, I said that." "Well," Elias replied evenly, "if you're not my property, then you're not my sole responsibility either." Her mouth opened, as if to unleash a torrent of words, but none came. She stood there for a long moment, her eyes locked on his, before turning sharply and walking out of the room. The click of the bedroom door was decisive. Alone in the quiet aftermath, Elias felt a strange mix of emotions. This wasn't easy. There was no satisfaction in witnessing Clara grapple with this sudden shift, but he felt a grim necessity to it. If she truly desired independence, he was determined to grant it, even if it meant dismantling the comfortable, albeit unbalanced, foundation they had built, one small neglected task at a time. The next few days unfolded with a quiet unraveling. Elias adhered to his silent plan, maintaining a calm exterior while consciously withdrawing from the responsibilities he had once embraced without question. The fissures in their routine widened daily. The first significant break came one evening when Clara returned from work to a darker house than usual. The trash still sat by the door, a silent accusation. Normally, Elias would have already taken it out, turned on the lamps, and perhaps even started dinner. Instead, he was in the living room, engrossed in a documentary, seemingly oblivious. Clara walked in, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Are you seriously just sitting there?" she asked, a weary edge to her voice. "Yep. Long day." She dropped her bag onto the counter with a thud. "You could at least take out the trash." Elias shrugged, his eyes still on the screen. "It's not that heavy. You can manage." A look of disbelief flickered across Clara's face. For a moment, it seemed she might explode, but instead, she snatched the trash bag and stormed out, the door banging shut behind her. The following morning, Elias found the sink piled high with unwashed dishes. It was a first. Clara had always been meticulous about a clean kitchen. It felt like a small act of defiance, a silent acknowledgement of the growing chasm between them. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, but Elias wasn't seeking an easy victory. He was trying to make a fundamental point. Throughout the week, the dominoes continued to fall. The refrigerator grew increasingly bare as Elias refrained from his usual grocery runs. Clara's laundry basket overflowed, untouched by the hand that had always sorted and folded it without being asked. Small inconveniences mounted, and Clara's frustration became more palpable with each passing day. By midweek, the tension reached a breaking point. Clara came home from work to a silent, dark house. The utility bill, another item Elias had always handled, remained unpaid. The power had been shut off that afternoon. He could have rectified it with a few clicks online, but he hadn't. This time, he wanted Clara to feel the direct consequences. She burst into the living room, her face flushed with anger. "The power's out, Elias," she exclaimed. "Why didn't you pay the bill?" He met her gaze calmly. "You knew it was due. The account details are in the folder." Clara threw her hands up in exasperation. "Why are you doing this? You're being so childish." Elias stood slowly, letting her words hang in the air. "Childish? You said you're not my property, remember? I'm respecting that. But if I'm not your property, then I'm not your responsibility either. You wanted independence? Fine. But independence means taking responsibility for your entire life." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Clara's face, as if she hadn't fully considered the implications of her words. Then, a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "This isn't independence, Elias. This is just you being petty." He didn't argue. He simply walked past her into the dimly lit kitchen. He wasn't interested in winning a verbal sparring match. He wanted her to understand the tangible realities of her statement. That night, Clara spent a frustrating hour on the phone with customer service, navigating automated systems and explaining their overdue account. Tasks Elias would have handled with practiced ease. Watching her struggle wasn't satisfying, but it reinforced his resolve. If she wanted him to step back, he would do so completely, even if it made their shared life more difficult in the short term. By the week's end, their home felt alien. It wasn't just the accumulating mess or the undone chores. It was the heavy silence, the palpable tension that hung between them like a shroud. They had descended into a cold war, each testing the other's limits. The once seamless rhythm of their partnership, now a series of jarring missteps and awkward silences. Yet, Elias remained steadfast. If this was the path Clara had chosen, he would follow it to its inevitable conclusion, no matter the destination. By the following Saturday morning, the silence in the house was suffocating. The power had been restored, the trash finally removed, and a few essential groceries restocked, all by Clara. She was performing the bare minimum to keep things functioning, but the strain of their fractured routine was etched on her face. The unspoken tension had become a battlefield. Each waited for the other to breach the silence. Elias sat at the kitchen table, nursing his coffee and scrolling through his phone. Clara entered, her hair still tousled from sleep, and went straight to the refrigerator. The near-empty shelves seemed to deflate her. She slammed the door shut. "This can't keep going, Elias," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. He didn't look up. "What can't?" She spun around to face him, her arms crossed defensively. Whatever this passive-aggressive silent treatment is, you're acting like some detached observer in our own home. We're supposed to be a team. Elias finally put down his phone, leaning back in his chair. Are we, Clara? Because last time I checked, you made it abundantly clear that you are not my property. Teams rely on mutual responsibility, and I'm not sure I'm part of yours anymore. Don't twist my words, she retorted, her jaw tightening. I didn't mean I wanted you to completely check out of our life. Well, that's the thing about words, Clara, Elias replied, his tone calm but firm. Once they're spoken, they carry weight. You made it clear you didn't want to feel like you owed me anything. Fine. But that sentiment cuts both ways. Clara's frustration finally boiled over. This isn't about owing anyone anything. It's about respect, about not feeling like my entire existence revolves around your decisions. Elias stood, the scrape of his chair against the linoleum echoing in the tense silence. Respect, he said, his voice finally rising. Do you think respect is me silently fixing every problem, paying every bill, and cleaning up every mess without so much as a thank you? Do you think respect is telling me that all of that effort makes you feel like property? Because if that's your definition, Clara, then you don't know the first thing about it. She flinched, her arms dropping to her sides, a flicker of hurt in her eyes. For a moment, the fight seemed to drain out of her. But then she straightened, her voice quieter but no less firm. I didn't ask for this, Elias. I didn't ask for you to do everything. No, he said, stepping closer, his voice softening slightly. But you expected it. Every time I stepped in to make things easier, you let me. Every time I picked up the slack, you leaned on it. And when I tried just once to talk about how it felt to carry all of that, you dismissed it as control. Clara's eyes glossed over, and she looked away, her hands clenching into fists. So what now? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. Do we just keep tearing each other apart? Elias didn't answer immediately. He turned back to the table, picking up his cooling coffee and staring into its dark depths. I don't know, Clara, he admitted finally, his voice heavy with a weary honesty. But I do know I'm done being the only one carrying the weight. If this is what you wanted, true independence, then you've got it. But don't expect me to magically pick up the pieces when things fall apart. Clara stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for him to retract his words, to offer some reassurance. When he didn't, a shaky breath escaped her lips, and she walked out of the room. The bedroom door closed softly this time, a stark contrast to the slamming doors of the past week. Elias remained in the kitchen, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The house felt impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that settles after a violent storm. For the first time, he wasn't sure if there was anything left to salvage, or if either of them even possessed the will to try. The confrontation didn't usher in a miraculous resolution. If anything, the chasm between Elias and Clara seemed to deepen in the following days. They existed in a strange, tense limbo, sharing the same space but moving around each other like polite strangers. Every interaction felt stilted, every word carefully chosen. It was evident that neither of them knew how to bridge the widening gap, or even if they truly desired to. The first ripple of external consequences arrived with a call from Clara's friend, Emily. Normally, Emily would contact Clara directly, but this time, her number appeared on Elias's phone. Hey, Elias, Emily said cautiously. I've been trying to get a hold of Clara, but she's not answering. Is everything all right? Elias hesitated. She's fine, Emily. Just busy. Busy? Emily sounded skeptical. She missed lunch with us on Saturday. That's not like her. Unsure how to navigate this, Elias deflected. Maybe you should try reaching her again later. That seemed to be the end of it. But a few days later, Elias's mother called, her tone carrying a familiar note of concern. Apparently, Clara had confided in her during a moment of vulnerability. Elias, she began, her voice stern, the same tone she'd used when he was a teenager in trouble. What in heaven's name is going on between you two? Clara says you're refusing to help with anything. That doesn't sound like you. Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. It's complicated, Mom. Well, maybe you should uncomplicate it, she snapped. Marriage isn't about keeping score, Elias. It's about partnership. Her words stung, but Elias didn't argue. There was no point in trying to explain the intricate nuances of their situation to someone who wasn't living within their strained walls, who hadn't felt the weight of years of unspoken expectations and the slow burn of resentment. The fallout wasn't confined to their personal sphere. The tension began to seep into other areas of their lives. At work, Elias found himself distracted, his thoughts drifting back to their silent battles, replaying conversations in his head, wondering where their connection had begun to fray. Clara, too, was grappling with the shift. He overheard her on a Zoom call with her boss, her voice laced with apology for a missed deadline. It was uncharacteristic. Clara was usually the epitome of organization, the one who effortlessly stayed on top of things. But lately, the cracks in her professional facade were beginning to show. One evening, Elias came home to find Clara sitting on the couch, her laptop open but her face buried in her hands. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed and weary. "The Wi-Fi isn't working," she said flatly. "I called the provider, but they said the account is overdue." Elias stood there for a moment, a familiar tug of responsibility warring with his newfound resolve. Finally, he said, his voice softer than it had been in days, You know how to pay it online, right?" Clara didn't respond. Instead, she closed the laptop with a sigh and leaned back against the cushions, staring blankly at the ceiling. "I can't do this anymore, Elias," she whispered, the words barely audible. Her unexpected vulnerability caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely around the living room. "All of it. I feel like I'm drowning, and you're just standing there watching." He wanted to argue, to remind her that this was the independence she had seemingly craved. But looking at her in that moment, the defiance had vanished, replaced by a raw exhaustion that mirrored his own. That's when it truly hit him. The consequences of their standoff weren't just affecting Clara. They were eroding both of them. Their home felt neglected, bills were piling up, and their stubborn refusal to yield was leading them down a destructive path. Whatever point he had been trying to make was losing its significance in the face of what they were actually losing: each other. He sat down across from her, the silence between them heavy with unspoken regret. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like a battle. It felt like a stalemate, a mutual exhaustion. "I didn't want it to get to this point, Clara," he said finally, his voice low and sincere. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions he couldn't quite decipher: sadness, perhaps, and a hint of regret. "Neither did I." They sat there for a long time, saying nothing, both grappling with the wreckage of their unspoken war and the daunting task of figuring out what came next. There was no sudden, dramatic reconciliation that night. No heartfelt apologies or immediate promises of change. Instead, the days that followed were marked by an unspoken truce, a fragile cessation of hostilities born more out of exhaustion than genuine agreement. They had both reached their limit. The first tentative steps towards healing began in small, hesitant ways. The next morning, Elias woke to find Clara at the kitchen table, surrounded by a disarray of papers, bills, receipts, account statements. She looked up as he entered, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met in a gaze that held neither accusation nor defiance, but a shared weariness. Then, she gestured towards the chair opposite her. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Can we go through these together?" It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a demand either. It was an olive branch, extended tentatively across the battlefield of their kitchen table. Elias sat down, and they began to sort through the financial chaos they had both ignored for too long. Clara asked questions about due dates and payment methods, and Elias answered without judgment or sarcasm. For the first time in weeks, they were working in tandem. Not because one demanded it, but because they both recognized the necessity. That small act of cooperation seemed to set a new, fragile tone. Clara began to take more initiative, calling utility companies, scheduling appointments, even starting dinner without waiting for Elias to step in. Meanwhile, Elias found himself easing back into roles he had deliberately abandoned. Not out of obligation, but out of a renewed sense of partnership. He would wash the dishes Clara left in the sink or take out the trash without being asked. Small gestures of care offered freely. It wasn't a seamless return to their old dynamic, but it was a start, a hesitant dance towards a new equilibrium. The conversations began to trickle back, slowly at first, punctuated by long silences and lingering tension. But the effort was now mutual. One evening, as they sat on the couch, the television murmuring in the background, Clara muted the sound and turned to Elias, her expression earnest. "Do you really think I don't appreciate you?" she asked, her voice soft. Elias looked at her, surprised by the directness of the question. Sometimes it felt that way, Clara," he admitted, the honesty raw. "Like everything I did was just expected, never truly noticed." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that. I guess I got so used to you handling everything that I forgot what it must have been like for you. And I forgot to tell you when I felt overwhelmed," Elias confessed. "Instead of talking about it, I just let it build up until it turned into resentment." That moment of shared vulnerability felt like a turning point. They began to have more of those honest, albeit difficult, conversations, laying bare their feelings without the immediate defensiveness that had characterized their recent interactions. It wasn't always easy, and moments of tension still flickered, but the willingness to communicate, to truly listen, was now present. Over time, they began to redefine their relationship, not as one of ownership or sole responsibility, but as a shared journey. Clara learned to lean on Elias without becoming entirely dependent, and Elias learned to step back without feeling like he was abandoning her. Their home slowly regained its order, the physical mess mirroring the gradual untangling of their emotional knot. But the scars of those difficult weeks remained, a quiet reminder of how close they had come to losing the foundation they had built and the arduous work it had taken to find a new, more balanced way forward. One night, as they sat down for a quiet dinner, Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over Elias's. Her touch was gentle, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience. "I don't want to go back to how things were, Elias," she said, her voice sincere. "But I don't want to lose this either." Elias nodded, squeezing her hand in return. "Me neither." And in that simple exchange, amidst the quiet intimacy of their shared meal, they began to navigate their new normal, not as owner and possession, not as sole caretaker and dependent, but as partners, imperfectly learning to navigate the beautiful, messy complexities of life together. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.